1 year after leaving the Navy SEALs, Owen Hart thought the hardest part of his life was finally behind him. Then one cold October morning, he noticed a tiny German Shepherd puppy hiding beneath a bridge he crossed every day on his way to work. The puppy wasn't barking, it wasn't begging for food, it wasn't even trying to come closer. It simply sat in the same spot, day after day, as if it were waiting for something that never came. At first, Owen told himself it wasn't his problem. A few days later, he found himself carrying a blanket, a crate, and walking back toward the bridge. He thought he was bringing home a lost puppy for a few days. At the time, that seemed simple enough. Before we begin, tell us what city you're watching from today. We'd love to know how far this story travels. Late October settled over Marietta, Ohio in a damp gray hush. Mist lifted from the Muskingum River before sunrise, and wet leaves clung to curbs, gutters, and the mouths of storm drains. The town woke slowly, with the sound of tires on rain-dark streets and the low hum of old bridge lights fading into morning. Owen Hart crossed the same bridge every weekday. He was 38, a former Navy SEAL, and he had been out of the military for a little more than a year. Now he worked for the county as a bridge inspection technician, checking drainage outlets, concrete seams, support columns, and the small warning signs most drivers never noticed. The job suited him. It gave him structure without too much conversation. It kept his hands busy and his mind pointed toward practical things. A crack had a measurement, rust had a location, water damage had a cause, people were harder. Owen rented a small ground-floor apartment in Riverside Commons, a quiet neighborhood near the river where most lawns looked freshly trimmed even when no one seemed to enjoy them. His routine was simple enough to recite without thinking: work, home, a run if the weather held, dinner alone, sleep. He did not join neighborhood meetings, did not linger near the mailboxes, and did not volunteer for the little committees that taped flyers to every door. Simple was safer. One Tuesday morning, after a night of steady rain, Owen climbed beneath the bridge to check a drainage outlet near the north support. Water still dripped from the concrete above him. The river moved slow and brown beyond the columns, carrying broken sticks and yellow leaves along its surface. Near the mouth of a storm drain, something small shifted. Owen lowered his clipboard. At first, he thought it was a wet rag caught against the wall. Then the shape lifted its head, and two dark eyes looked back at him from the shadow of the concrete. It was a German Shepherd puppy. The little dog could not have been more than 5 weeks old. Its black and tan fur was damp along the belly and paws, and one soft ear leaned sideways while the other tried and failed to stand. Its paws looked too large for its body, the way shepherd puppies often did before they grew into themselves. The puppy stayed tucked beside the drain. Owen looked around. No leash, no crate, no person calling from the path above. A truck crossed overhead, sending a low vibration through the bridge. The puppy flinched once, then pressed closer to the wall. "Easy," Owen said. The puppy watched him without moving. Owen stood there longer than he meant to. Then he checked his watch, looked once more toward the empty walkway, and finished the inspection. He told himself someone nearby had probably lost the pup and would come looking before the day was over. By the next morning, he expected the spot to be empty. It wasn't. The puppy sat in nearly the same place, its small body folded tight beside the concrete wall. Owen slowed when he saw it, though he kept walking at first. He had a report due before lunch and a supervisor who cared more about forms than weather. On Thursday, the puppy was still there. On Friday, Owen stopped pretending he was only checking the drain. He crouched several yards away and studied the ground around it. A flattened piece of cardboard lay against the wall, soaked through at the edges. Near it sat an empty plastic food container, stained with old gravy and speckled with grit. Someone had noticed. Someone had fed it. Then the bridge had gone quiet again. Owen stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, staring at that container longer than he wanted to. He understood that kind of help too well. Give just enough to quiet the conscience, then leave before the situation asks for anything more. He went to work anyway. The image followed him through the rest of the day. The damp cardboard, the oversized paws, the puppy sitting in that same narrow place while traffic rolled overhead. It returned while he ate a sandwich alone in his county truck near a closed boat ramp. It was still with him when he drove home past Riverside Commons and saw neighbors setting out pumpkins on their porches like the season had not turned cold. That evening, Owen changed into running clothes. He made it half a mile before turning toward the bridge. At the convenience store near the river, he bought a small pouch of puppy food and a bottle of water. The cashier barely looked up from his phone. Owen carried the items under one arm, irritated by how much the errand felt like admitting something. The puppy was still under the bridge. Owen opened the food and set it near the drier side of the wall, close enough for the smell to reach but far enough to leave space. He poured water into the empty plastic container and stepped back. The puppy did not come forward while he watched. So he left. Later after his run, Owen returned by the same path. The food was gone. Most of the water was gone too. The puppy sat beside the drain. For the next 2 evenings, the pattern repeated. Food, water, distance. Owen never tried to grab the puppy and never crowded it against the wall. He had seen enough fear in his life to know that pressure did not always look like violence. Still, the puppy did not leave. That was the part that began to trouble him. A hungry puppy should search. A frightened puppy should hide somewhere deeper. This one ate when Owen left, drank when no one stood too close, and then returned to the same exact place as if the rest of the world ended at the edge of that concrete patch. The rain came back Sunday night. It was thin and cold, the kind that did not sound dramatic but found every seam in a jacket. Owen lay awake in his apartment, listening to water tick against the patio outside. The heater clicked on and off in the wall. Somewhere in the building, a pipe knocked softly. At 5:16 in the morning, he stopped trying to sleep. He dressed in the dark and drove to the bridge before most of Marietta had turned on its kitchen lights. The river path was empty. A faint drizzle moved through the beams of his flashlight as he walked down beneath the bridge. The puppy was there. Same wall, same drain, same small shape curled against the cold. This time, when it heard him, it raised its head only a little. After a few seconds, its chin settled back onto its paws. Owen stood still. The wet cardboard had collapsed into a dark, useless sheet. The plastic container had tipped on its side. Rainwater had spread farther across the concrete, not yet reaching the puppy, but close enough to make the space feel smaller. He took out his phone. The veterinary clinic near Front Street had a number printed on a sign by the gas station, and he had passed it often enough to remember the name. A woman answered on the third ring, her voice alert despite the early hour. Owen kept the explanation plain, a German Shepherd puppy. About 5 weeks old, under a bridge for several days, eating a little, barely moving from one spot, cold rain. No owner in sight. The woman asked questions quickly. Was the puppy shivering? Did it seem able to walk? Had it been exposed overnight? Was there a chance it could crawl into the drainage system if frightened? Owen answered what he could. Then she grew quiet for a beat. When she spoke again, her voice had softened but become firmer. A puppy that young could decline fast in cold, damp weather, she told him. Stress could keep it frozen in place, and young animals often looked stable until they suddenly were not. If Owen planned to help, she said, waiting several more days was not a good idea. The call ended. Owen lowered the phone and looked toward the puppy. Above them, a car crossed the bridge, and the concrete gave a familiar low tremor. The little dog lifted its eyes toward him without rising. Rain tapped softly into the shallow water spreading across the floor. For days, Owen had been waiting for someone else to make the situation clear. No one had. He crouched several yards away, resting his forearms on his knees and let the silence sit between them. All right, he said quietly. The puppy blinked. Owen looked at the drain, the river, the collapsed cardboard, and the small body still holding its place beside the wall. By then, the problem no longer felt like something he had found beneath a bridge. It felt like a choice he had been walking past. The puppy blinked at him from across the damp concrete. Rain tapped softly beneath the bridge. Water dripped from the support beams in slow, uneven rhythms. Somewhere above, a pickup truck crossed the bridge, sending a faint vibration through the structure before the sound faded into the gray morning. Owen remained crouched. For several minutes, neither of them moved. The veterinary technician's words stayed with him during the drive home, during his shower, and through the first half of his workday. By lunchtime, he had already stopped pretending he wasn't going back. That afternoon, he stopped at a farm supply store on the edge of town. He bought a small transport crate, a fleece blanket, a bag of puppy food, nothing expensive, nothing permanent. At least that was what he told himself. The plan was simple. Bring the puppy somewhere safe. Let it recover for a few days. Then find a shelter or rescue organization that could handle the rest. A temporary solution, no more than that. By late afternoon, Owen was back beneath the bridge. The puppy was exactly where he expected. The crate sat several yards away with its door tied open. Owen spread the blanket nearby and settled himself on an overturned concrete block. Then he waited. The first half hour passed quietly. The second hour wasn't much different. A light breeze carried the smell of wet leaves from the riverbank. Water moved steadily beneath the bridge. Every so often, the puppy lifted its head to watch him before lowering it again. Owen found himself talking, not because he expected the puppy to understand, because silence felt heavier than conversation. "You've picked a bad place to live." The puppy's ears twitched. Owen nodded toward the river. "Flood season gets ugly around here." The puppy continued watching him. For a while, Owen spoke about ordinary things: the weather, the county truck that needed new brakes, the supervisor who thought every report should have been finished yesterday. The words came easier than expected. Then, without realizing it, he slipped into an older habit. "Stay." The puppy stared. "Easy." No reaction. "Hold position." Nothing. Owen rubbed a hand across his face. For years, commands had been part of daily life. Clear instructions, clear expectations, clear outcomes. The small creature in front of him had no idea what any of those words meant. For several seconds, Owen simply looked at the puppy. Then he laughed. The sound surprised him. A real laugh. Not polite. Not forced. The puppy tilted its head. That made him laugh again. "You're 5 weeks old," he said. "You probably don't even know what your own feet are doing yet." The puppy blinked. The moment was small. Still, something shifted. The tension beneath the bridge eased just enough for both of them to breathe. As daylight faded, the puppy finally did something it had never done before. It stood, slowly, carefully. Its oversized paws slipped slightly on the damp concrete. Owen stayed perfectly still. The puppy took one step, then another, then a third. The distance between them wasn't much. Maybe 8 feet, yet each step seemed to require enormous effort. Trust often looked dramatic in movies. In real life, it looked more like this. One uncertain step at a time. The puppy stopped halfway. Its eyes never left Owen. For a brief moment, he thought it might actually come the rest of the way. Then a truck horn exploded somewhere above the bridge. The puppy flinched violently. Its body spun around. Within seconds, it had retreated to the familiar corner beside the drain. The same spot, the same wall, the same invisible boundary. The bridge fell silent again. Owen released a slow breath. The setback shouldn't have surprised him. It did anyway. He had seen enough progress to forget how fragile it really was. Trust wasn't a straight line, especially for something that had learned fear before safety. The sky darkened earlier than usual that evening. Heavy clouds gathered over the river. By nightfall, rain was falling harder than it had all week. The next morning, conditions looked worse. The Muskingum had risen noticeably overnight. Brown water pushed faster against the support columns. Branches and debris drifted downstream in growing numbers. Owen stood beneath the bridge and studied the river. Then he looked toward the puppy. The space beneath the bridge felt smaller now, more vulnerable. For the first time, urgency outweighed hesitation. He placed the transport crate near the wall and secured the door fully open. Then he removed his old work jacket and stretched it across the concrete between the puppy and the crate. A path. Nothing more. The jacket smelled like rain, work, and the familiar scent the puppy had encountered for days. Owen moved back and sat down. Then he waited. Minutes passed. Rain echoed across the underside of the bridge. The puppy remained motionless. A gust of wind pushed spray beneath the structure. Water dripped from the concrete ceiling. The puppy looked toward the jacket, then toward Owen, then back again. One step. It stopped. Another. Still hesitant. The puppy lowered its nose and sniffed the jacket before standing there for nearly a full minute. Owen didn't speak. He didn't move. The silence did the work. Another step, then another. The crate stood only a few feet away. The puppy hesitated at the entrance. Rainwater splashed nearby. A passing vehicle rattled the bridge overhead. The puppy flinched. For one terrible second, Owen thought it might run back to the drain. Instead, the puppy stepped forward, one paw, then the other. Finally, the rest of its small body disappeared inside the crate. Owen closed his eyes briefly. The hardest step had taken nearly a week. The drive to the veterinary clinic felt strangely quiet. The puppy remained curled inside the crate, wrapped in the fleece blanket. Every so often, Owen glanced toward the passenger seat to make sure it was still there. The examination took less than an hour. No microchip, no registered owner, no missing dog reports matching the puppy's description. The veterinarian estimated an age of roughly 5 weeks, mild malnutrition, dehydration, significant stress response, no major injuries. Good news, considering everything else. The puppy slept through most of the appointment. By the time Owen carried the crate back outside, rain was falling steadily again. The shelter option still existed. So did several rescue organizations. Nothing had changed. At least that was what logic said. Yet the drive home felt different. The passenger seat was occupied now. The apartment felt different too. Owen unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar silence greeted him as always, but this time another sound followed. A faint rustle from inside the crate. He set it down carefully near the living room wall. For the first time since moving to Marietta, another living creature occupied the apartment with him. The puppy remained inside the crate, watching everything. Owen stood there for a moment, keys still in his hand. Rain tapped against the windows. The refrigerator hummed quietly in the kitchen. The puppy blinked. Neither of them knew what came next. For now, they were simply dry. And safe. The first few days were quieter than Owen expected. The puppy stayed close to the crate at first, stepping out only when the apartment had gone still. It sniffed the edge of the rug, the leg of the coffee table, the corner where Owen left his work boots, then hurried back to the blanket as if the room might change its mind and become dangerous. Owen kept food and water near the wall and gave the puppy space. That seemed to help. By the third morning, the little German shepherd had discovered Owen's boots. It slept with its chin across one of them, small paws pressed against the leather as if guarding something important. When Owen moved the boot to put it on, the puppy lifted its head and stared at him with quiet disappointment. That look stayed with Owen all the way to work. By evening, the puppy had found the shoelaces. Owen came home to one lace stretched across the floor, damp and chewed at the end. The puppy sat beside it, round-eyed and still, as if waiting to see whether this was a crime or an achievement. Owen looked at the lace, then at the puppy, and shook his head. "Impressive work," he said. The puppy's tail tapped once against the floor. It was ridiculous how much that small sound changed the room. Over the next few days, the apartment began collecting signs of another life. A water bowl near the kitchen, a folded towel by the patio door, tiny paw prints on the floor after Owen carried the puppy outside during a break in the rain. Once a yellow leaf blew against the sliding glass door, and the puppy chased it from inside, slipping on the wood floor and tumbling sideways into the rug. Owen laughed before he could stop himself. The puppy looked offended for 3 whole seconds, then chased the leaf again. Owen had known disciplined dogs in military spaces, calm animals with sharp eyes and steady training. This was different. This creature stumbled over its own feet, fell asleep halfway inside its blanket, and seemed deeply suspicious of the washing machine. Somehow that made it harder. Owen still told himself the plan had not changed. A few days of food, warmth, and rest. Then a shelter or rescue group with proper foster homes and adoption contacts. He made a list on a yellow legal pad and taped it to the refrigerator. Call shelters. Ask about German Shepherd rescue. Buy puppy pads. Temporary. He underlined the last word once. For a little while, the apartment felt like it had found a gentler rhythm. But fragile peace has a way of drawing attention, especially in places built on rules. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Owen had just returned from work and opened the patio door for fresh air. The puppy stood near the screen watching a squirrel hop along the fence line behind Riverside Commons. It gave a soft, uncertain bark, more surprised than brave. A woman's voice cut through the yard. "Mr. Hart," Owen turned. Denise Whitaker stood on the walkway beyond the patio fence, holding a slim black folder against her chest. She was in her early 60s, tall and narrow, with silver blonde hair pulled into a neat twist and glasses hanging from a chain at her neck. Her raincoat was buttoned perfectly, Her expression looked as if it had been arranged that way years ago and never reconsidered. The puppy stepped back behind Owen's ankle. Denise looked at the dog, then at Owen. "You have an animal in the unit," she said. Owen opened the screen door halfway, temporarily. That is rarely how violations begin on paper. Her voice was calm, which somehow made it worse. Denise Whitaker was president of the Riverside Commons Homeowners Association. Though Owen had never understood why an association had so much control over people who rented from owners. Since moving in, he had managed to avoid her beyond short hallway greetings and one conversation about trash bins being visible from the street after 8 a.m. She had not liked him then. She liked him less now. Owen explained the situation briefly. The bridge, the rain, the clinic visit, the fact that the puppy had no chip and no matched lost report. He kept his tone steady, leaving out the parts that felt harder to explain. Denise listened without interrupting. When he finished, she opened the folder and removed a printed notice. "Riverside Commons has a restricted breed policy," she said. "German Shepherds are listed. He's 5 weeks old. The policy does not separate puppies from adult dogs. He was under a bridge. And now he is in a restricted property." The puppy pressed closer to Owen's boot. Denise held out the notice. Owen did not take it right away. Rain tapped lightly on the metal patio railing. Somewhere across the courtyard, wind pushed a fall Halloween decoration against a porch post, making a faint plastic scraping sound. "You're serious," Owen said. "Yes, he needs a few days. You have 7. The words landed cleanly without heat. That made them feel colder. Owen took the notice. The paper was crisp and dry, protected by the folder until the moment it reached his hand. At the top in bold print was the phrase "Notice of Pet Policy Violation." 7 calendar days, after that, further action. Denise closed the folder. "I suggest you make arrangements quickly." The puppy gave a tiny sound behind Owen's leg. Denise's eyes moved toward it again, and for a moment something flickered across her face. It vanished before Owen could understand it. Then she turned and walked away. The first call Owen made was to the property manager. The answer came the next morning. The HOA rule was part of the insurance agreement. The property owner had signed it. The manager sounded sympathetic, but sympathy did not alter paperwork. German Shepherds, Pit Bulls, Rottweilers, and several other breeds were prohibited unless the policy changed. Owen hung up without saying much. Day 1 began with the puppy chewing the corner of the violation notice. Owen took it away gently, then sat at the kitchen table with his phone, calling shelters within driving distance. Some were full. Some had wait lists. One asked whether the puppy could stay with him another week, and Owen nearly laughed at the wrongness of that question. By day 2, he visited a shelter outside Parkersburg. The building smelled of bleach, wet fur, and exhaustion. A woman at the front desk answered phones while bottle-feeding a kitten tucked inside her sweatshirt pocket. In the kennels, dogs barked in waves, each voice rising over the next until the sound became something heavy enough to press against the ribs. The people there were trying. That was what made it worse. A shelter worker showed Owen the intake area and explained how puppies were handled, how foster homes were limited, how larger breeds often needed extra screening. She spoke kindly, but Owen noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the stack of forms waiting on the counter. "There are good homes," she said. "There are also more dogs than good homes." Owen drove back to Marietta with the radio off. That evening, the puppy fell asleep on his boot again. Day 3 brought colder rain. Owen bought a small rubber ball, even though he told himself it would go with the puppy when the time came. He tossed it once across the living room. The puppy chased it, tripped, recovered, and pounced on the ball with wild pride. Owen smiled. Then he looked at the yellow legal pad on the refrigerator. 3 days gone, 4 left. Outside, Riverside Commons sat neat and quiet beneath the rain, every hedge trimmed, every rule intact. Inside, the puppy carried the rubber ball to Owen's boot and dropped it there. Owen stared at it for a long moment before reaching down. "All right," he said softly. "One more time." Day 4 arrived with steady rain. The kind that never seemed dramatic enough to make the news but never quite stopped either. By afternoon, puddles had formed beside curbs throughout Marietta. By evening, the clouds sat low over the river, turning the town into a blur of wet pavement and reflected streetlights. Inside the apartment, Ledger was asleep beside Owen's boots. The rubber ball rested nearby. The yellow legal pad still hung on the refrigerator. 3 days gone, 3 days left. Owen had spent most of the afternoon calling shelters again. One rescue organization thought it might have a foster opening within 2 weeks. Another suggested expanding the search radius into Columbus. Neither option solved the problem sitting on his refrigerator door. The deadline remained. Ledger lifted his head when Owen stood up to refill his coffee. The puppy watched him cross the kitchen, then settled back onto the floor. It was becoming harder not to notice the little routines, the way Ledger followed him from room to room, the way he waited beside the bathroom door, the way he carried the rubber ball everywhere except where Owen actually threw it. Small things. The kind people missed until they were about to lose them. Near midnight, Owen finally went to bed. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The apartment was dark. For a while, everything was quiet. Then Ledger started barking. Owen opened his eyes immediately. The sound was wrong. Over the past few days, Ledger had barked only a handful of times. Usually at squirrels, strange noises, or his own reflection in the glass patio door. Those barks were brief and uncertain. This was different. Sharp, urgent, relentless. Owen sat up. Ledger. The barking continued. The puppy stood near the apartment door, body rigid, ears forward, tail low. Owen checked the clock. 12:17 a.m. Ledger barked again, then ran toward the door. A cold feeling settled somewhere beneath Owen's ribs. He grabbed a flashlight and followed. The moment the door opened, Ledger bolted into the rain. The puppy crossed the courtyard faster than Owen had ever seen him move. Wet grass sprayed beneath his paws as he slipped between 2 parked cars and headed toward the back row of homes bordering the property. Ledger, the puppy, never slowed. Owen ran after him. Rain soaked through his sweatshirt almost immediately. Porch lights glowed across Riverside Commons, reflecting off puddles and slick sidewalks. Most windows remained dark. Ledger reached a backyard fence, stopped, barked, then barked again. Owen arrived seconds later. At first, he saw nothing. Then the flashlight beam moved across the grass. A figure lay near the patio, motionless. The flashlight snapped back. Denise Whitaker. For 1 second, Owen simply stared. Rainwater darkened her coat. One arm lay awkwardly beneath her. Her glasses had fallen several feet away. Near the edge of the patio sat an overturned chair. Denise, no response. Owen crossed the yard immediately. A cell phone rested face down in the grass. Several feet away lay a small prescription bottle. Denise's eyes were partially open but unfocused. One side of her face appeared slack. When she tried to speak, the words came out distorted and incomplete. Training took over. Not military training. Emergency response training. Calm, assess. Act. Owen pulled out his phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered quickly. While help was on the way, Owen stayed beside Denise beneath the rain. He kept talking, asking simple questions, trying to keep her awake and responsive. Ledger remained nearby, silent now, watching. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Red and blue lights washed across the wet neighborhood. Paramedics moved quickly, asking questions while loading Denise onto a stretcher. One of them glanced at Owen after hearing the timeline. Good thing you found her when you did. The ambulance disappeared into the rain. The courtyard felt strangely empty afterward. Ledger pressed against Owen's leg. For the first time all night, the puppy looked small again. The next morning, Owen called the hospital. Denise was alive. That was all the receptionist could tell him. It wasn't until later that afternoon that he learned more. A physician briefly spoke with him by phone after confirming he had been involved in the emergency call. The likely diagnosis was a stroke. Treatment had been started quickly. Timing mattered a lot. The doctor chose his words carefully, but the message was clear enough. Another 15 or 20 minutes could have made the outcome significantly worse. After the call ended, Owen sat quietly at the kitchen table. Ledger slept nearby. Outside, rain continued falling. For the first time since receiving the violation notice, Owen found himself thinking less about Denise as the woman from the HOA and more about Denise as a person who almost hadn't survived the night. Late that evening, someone knocked on his door. A woman stood outside, mid-30s, dark coat, tired eyes. She introduced herself as Claire Whitaker, Denise's daughter. I wanted to thank you, she said. Her voice cracked slightly. The doctors said she was lucky. Owen shook his head. Ledger found her. Claire looked down at the puppy. Ledger sat near the doorway, watching quietly. A small smile appeared on her face. Then thank both of you. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Rain tapped softly against the railing outside. The hallway smelled faintly of wet coats and floor cleaner. Claire thanked him again before leaving for the hospital. The apartment grew quiet once more. But nothing felt quite the same. The next morning, the yellow legal pad still hung on the refrigerator. 2 days left. The deadline hadn't changed. Neither had the violation notice. The realization felt strangely unfair. Ledger had helped save the life of the very person demanding his removal from the property. Yet paperwork did not care about irony. Neither did deadlines. Over the next day, Owen forced himself to continue preparing. He washed the puppy's blanket, folded it neatly, packed the rubber ball, packed the food bowl, packed the extra toys he had bought without meaning to buy. The cardboard box sat near the front door. Each item felt smaller once it was inside. The apartment did too. Ledger followed him while he worked, occasionally stealing a toy back out of the box and carrying it across the room. Once, he dragged the blanket halfway into the living room before Owen noticed. Neither of them won that argument. By the evening of day 5, the box remained beside the door. The blanket remained outside it. Rain finally stopped. A pale sunset appeared beyond the apartment buildings, washing the clouds in muted gold before fading into darkness. Ledger fell asleep with his head resting against Owen's shoe. Owen sat on the couch and stared at the packed box near the entrance. He told himself he was doing the responsible thing. He told himself shelters existed for a reason. He told himself people let go of things every day. The explanations sounded reasonable. None of them felt convincing. Outside, the neighborhood settled into another ordinary night. Inside, the countdown continued. 2 days remained. Day 7 arrived beneath a clear sky. The rain that had lingered over Marietta for more than a week had finally moved east, leaving behind cold air and bright autumn sunlight. Fallen leaves collected along the sidewalks of Riverside Commons. Somewhere beyond the apartment buildings, a lawnmower hummed in the distance. Inside Owen's apartment, everything was ready. The folded blanket sat beside the transport crate. The rubber ball was packed. The food bowl had been cleaned and dried. The paperwork from the shelter rested on the kitchen counter. Nothing had been forgotten. That somehow made it worse. Ledger seemed to think they were going somewhere fun. The puppy followed Owen from room to room with growing excitement, tail wagging every time the crate came into view. When Owen picked up the leash he had recently bought, Ledger bounced in a clumsy circle and nearly slipped on the floor. Then he ran back and grabbed the rubber ball. Owen looked away for a moment. Losing something is difficult. Watching it look forward to being lost can be harder. The puppy trotted back toward him, dropped the ball at his feet and sat down, waiting, trusting. Owen rubbed the back of his neck and glanced toward the clock. An hour remained before he planned to leave. That was when the doorbell rang. Ledger barked once and hurried toward the entrance. Owen opened the door. Denise Whitaker stood outside. Claire stood beside her. For a second, nobody spoke. Denise looked different. The sharp edges remained, but they seemed softer somehow. The hospital stay had left faint shadows beneath her eyes, and she leaned slightly on a cane. It was the first time Owen had ever seen her without a folder, a clipboard, or a violation notice in her hand. Ledger sat beside Owen's leg. His tail wagged. Denise looked down at him, then back at Owen. "May we come in?" A few minutes later, all three sat in the living room. The packed crate remained near the door. The sight of it seemed to weigh on everyone. For a while, Denise simply watched Ledger chase his rubber ball across the rug. The puppy returned, dropped it near her shoes, then backed away. Denise stared at the ball. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded older than Owen remembered. "My father was 71 when it happened." The room fell quiet. 15 years earlier, she explained, her father had been walking near his neighborhood park. A large dog broke free from a yard and ran toward him. The dog never bit him, never touched him, but it frightened him. He stepped backward into the street. A passing vehicle couldn't stop in time. The accident shattered his leg and left lasting complications that followed him for the rest of his life. Denise looked down at her hands. "I spent years blaming the dog." The puppy nudged the rubber ball against her shoe. She barely noticed. After that, every story sounded the same to me. One mistake, one loose leash, one bad day. Claire remained silent. She had clearly heard the story before. Denise continued. Years after the accident, she built a career in insurance risk management. Evaluating liability became second nature. Every policy, every restriction, every rule revolved around the same question. What could go wrong? Over time, that habit spread beyond work. I stopped seeing individual dogs, she said quietly. I saw probabilities. The room remained still except for the soft click of Ledger's nails against the floor. Denise watched him for a long moment. Then he saved my life. No one answered. Nothing needed to be added. Outside, a gust of wind pushed leaves across the parking lot. Inside, Ledger dropped the ball again and sat expectantly between them. Denise smiled. The expression looked unfamiliar on her face. I'm not here to apologize for enforcing the rules. Owen nodded. He understood that. She took a breath. I'm here to apologize for letting an old fear decide things it shouldn't. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Denise reached into her purse and removed a folded document. Not a violation notice. A meeting request. I've spent the last few days making phone calls. Owen frowned. The insurance company? She nodded. The same company that requires the breed restriction. Claire smiled slightly. My mother can be very persistent when she wants something. That turned out to be an understatement. The meeting took place later that morning. The insurance office occupied a modest brick building on the edge of town. The discussion lasted nearly 2 hours. It was not easy. The company representatives reviewed statistics, liability concerns, and policy language. Denise challenged assumptions. Owen spoke about responsible ownership, structured training, and the difference between breed stereotypes and individual behavior. No one raised their voice. No one stormed out. The process moved slowly, the way real decisions often do. Finally, a compromise emerged. The restriction would remain in place for the community. However, Riverside Commons could apply for a supervised pilot exemption program. Participating owners would be required to complete approved training, maintain insurance documentation, and follow stricter safety guidelines. Any serious violation would end the program. It wasn't perfect. It was enough. When they left the building, Denise stood quietly beside the parking lot. The autumn wind tugged at her coat. I think my father would have liked that puppy, she said. Owen looked surprised. So do I. Back at the apartment, the paperwork was signed. The shelter forms were thrown away. The transport crate remained, though it no longer felt like a goodbye. That evening, Owen sat on the floor while the puppy chewed happily on a toy. You need a name. The puppy ignored him. Owen smiled. For several weeks he had avoided naming the dog. Names created permanence. Permanence created attachment. That excuse no longer worked. His eyes drifted toward the notebook lying on the coffee table. The same notebook he had used for shelter contacts, phone numbers, and plans. A record, a page. Ledger, he said. The puppy lifted its head. Ledger, a new entry, a new chapter. The name stayed. Months passed. Winter arrived, then spring. The pilot program expanded beyond expectations. Several families enrolled in training classes. Retta Rees, who had once hesitated around dogs, began attending community events. Volunteers organized educational workshops about responsible ownership, puppy socialization, and safety. Denise attended nearly every meeting. She still enforced rules. She simply listened more carefully before assuming the worst. Claire visited often. The neighborhood slowly changed. So did Owen. People began greeting him by name instead of as the quiet veteran in Building C. He joined community cleanups, helped repair a playground fence, shared coffee with neighbors he once avoided. The changes were small. Most meaningful ones are. One spring evening, Owen walked beside the river trail near the bridge where everything had started. Ledger moved ahead of him, larger now, healthy and confident. The old storm drain remained beneath the bridge. The concrete wall remained. The river still carried leaves downstream. Only one thing had truly changed. The puppy no longer lived there. Neither, in a way, did Owen. Sometimes people spend years believing they are protecting themselves from old wounds. What they are really protecting are the fears those wounds left behind. And sometimes healing begins the moment we stop looking at the present through the lens of an old memory. Ledger glanced back at Owen. His tail wagged once. Then both of them continued forward. If you enjoy grounded stories about people, animals, and the unexpected ways lives cross paths, please like the video and subscribe. We'd be glad to have you here. What stays with me about this story isn't the rescue beneath the bridge or even the meeting that changed the rules. It's a puppy sleeping on a worn work boot, a rubber ball carried from room to room, a woman who spent years seeing risk before she saw people. Most of us carry old experiences into new situations. Sometimes those experiences protect us. Sometimes they quietly build walls we don't even realize are there. Owen thought Denise was simply difficult. Denise thought she was being careful. Both were seeing the present through something that happened long ago. This story is fictional, but the emotions behind it are real. Many of us know what it feels like to lose trust, to keep our distance, or to discover that someone isn't who we first believed they were. If this story reminded you of a person, a dog, or a moment you still think about years later, feel free to share it in the comments. I'd love to read it. And tonight, I find myself saying a simple prayer of thanks for second chances, for unexpected companions, and for the quiet ways God sometimes places exactly what we need in our path, even when we don't recognize it at first. As for me, I keep coming back to the image of Ledger asleep beside those boots. Not because anything dramatic was happening, but because sometimes belonging arrives so quietly that we only recognize it after it has already taken a place in our lives.